Chapter 4 addresses the foundational concept of evolution, a genetic change of a population over time in response to environmental selective pressures. Most people associate Charles Darwin with the idea of evolution, but it had been forming for hundreds of years before his publication. He had gathered evidence worldwide to challenge the religious belief of origin at the time. What evolution causes is a change in the collective gene pool of a population of organisms. Most of these changes have little effect. Some are severe enough to cause the death of those with these newly inherited genes. Some of the time, these changes will give certain members of the next generation some form of advantage, allowing them to reproduce more and therefore pass these traits on to their offspring. This chapter also examines the idea of biological communities and species interaction. Giraffes do not have long necks because they stretch to the top of trees to feed. There were mutations that occurred, and some of the offspring developed longer necks than other giraffes, giving them the advantage of being able to feed higher. They were therefore stronger and able to produce more offspring over time. Shorter necks could not compete and therefore did not reproduce or produce more short-necked giraffes. Darwin used the term adaptation. Others say he mentioned survival of the fittest. Organisms must be well adapted to their environment. The saguaro cactus have a very narrow tolerance limit to environmental changes and therefore are found in limited areas of the American Southwest. The bell-shaped curve plots the abundance of individuals on the vertical axis against the environmental variable on the horizontal axis, which could represent temperature, rainfall, or some other limiting factor. There is an optimal range in the middle, and as you move to the sides, the organisms might be stressed but recover. Or the conditions are severe enough to cause the absence of that organism in this extreme environment. So you see that there's a comfortable environment in the middle, an area next to that where they actually can survive, but they're very highly stressed. And if you moved into more severe conditions, the species isn't even there. If conditions change long-term, only those with the most favorable adaptations will reproduce effectively, and the population will slowly look more and more like this adaptable variant. Organisms will find their own ecological niche, what its role is in the ecosystem. Here we see pandas are grouped with specialists. They have an extremely limited food choice and environment they can survive in, whereas this black bear is grouped as a generalist, is well adapted to eating a variety of food and existing in a variety of conditions. Where two species overlap in their respective niches, you have competition for resources. Grizzly bears and black bears will overlap, and this causes tension if they meet up. In the right graphic, two species do not have this competition as they have found their own niches. Polar bears are closely related to grizzly bears, but over time, where there is sea ice, they have specialized on living and feeding on the ice, whereas grizzlies do not like to go on the ice to feed. There was a divergence, a moving apart in the evolution of these bears to minimize competition. This is a pretty radical example, where in the next slide we see a more subtle one. In this slide we see that there are various warblers, similar types of birds, occupying the same forest in the eastern North America. To minimize the competition and conflict, they have evolved to specialize in using different parts of the tree, shown here as the height above the ground. So you see up here you have warblers that are feeding in the top of the tree with whatever's happening up there, and you have other warblers feeding lower down in the tree. And so we call this that they have effectively partitioned the resources. Evolution is usually a slow process in complex organisms. Here is an example of something caused by geography to change in the lower part. You see that this environment at the top is interconnected, and you have a single population of these squirrels. Something has happened in the geological makeup of the area. This might be a river or some kind of obstruction that has come to pass that has isolated some of the squirrels here on the right from those squirrels on the left. So this has caused the single population of squirrels to be separated by this barrier, and they're therefore not able to interbreed anymore. Isolated from one another, they have a tendency to take on different adaptations to their unique environment. And here it's shown that this squirrel is a darker color and this squirrel is a redder color, which are different than the original squirrel. If they stay isolated, they may evolve into separate species. This is known as allopatric speciation. One of the traits that Darwin reported on was the shape of the beak of finches on the Galapagos Islands. He correctly speculated that they had come from a common ancestral finch, but over time had moved into special niches which required unique beaks. Today they have evolved enough to become separate subspecies and do not interbreed anymore. Science attempts to categorize things based on their relationship to each other. The science of placing discovered organism into the correct spot and naming it uses a standard convention called taxonomy. The people who do this are called taxonomists. Early taxonomists compared organism shapes and general features. Today, it is much more complicated, and they use genetics and DNA to help classify. Animals that might look like they belong together, pandas and grizzly bears, are often determined to be very different or are classified some distance apart. In this graphic, you see that we have the various major groups of organisms, the animals and the plants, the fungi. Protistas are simple one-celled or simple-celled organisms, and we have Archaeobacter and then true bacteria, eubacteria here. And the idea that you would follow this to see where over time, from the beginning, let's say 5 billion years ago, going up to present time, where the different groups have actually diverged from one another. So according to this taxonomic classification, animals have more things in common with fungi than they actually do with plants. It is important to learn about the different kinds of interactions between species, something that we often label symbiosis. On the left, two elephant seals are fighting for the best part of the beach where the most females will congregate. This is called intra-species competition. Competition between members of the same species, intra. The right side shows hyenas and vultures competing for a wildebeest carcass. These are different species, and so this is called interspecies competition. This figure addresses biodiversity in various environments. As you move along the horizontal axis, you see an increase in the productivity. This is often measured by biomass, the mass of all living things in that region. Here you see that a tropical rainforest is the richest terrestrial environment, and it is equivalent to coral reefs, which are also very rich, biodiverse areas. Deserts, on the other hand, due to the low amount of usable water, have a very small productivity. An important ecological concept is succession, the changes that occur over a long period of time to the biodiversity and biomass of an area. Starting with only exposed rock and no life, we see that early pioneer species like moss and lichens begin to break the rock down while increasing the biological component. As time advances, you see that other simple organisms using the lichen and moss are making the area more complex. You see that we're adding now herbs and grasses and tree seedlings. This continues as new species inhabit these enriched environments. This is an example of primary succession. We see a similar thing happen during the recovery from wildfire. Species are often destroyed or driven away from the area, and as the area recovers, it goes through a similar series of steps. This is called secondary succession. So I hope that you enjoy Chapter 4, and contact me if you have questions.